What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. And it's the moment everyone's been waiting for. It's opening day.
It's cool, it's overcast, it's foggy on opening day here in Cleveland. Hello again, everyone. I'm Harry Doyle, along with my good friend and partner, Monty, what's-his-name, giving a big wahoo welcome to all the Cleveland faithful. It's a brand new season and a new team spirit, as novice owner Roger Dorn has made two very savvy front office moves, acquiring free agent slugger Jack Parkman and announcing his own retirement, eliminating a huge hole at third base.
I don't know, not a great spring, 3-24.
So what? They had a bad spring. They did the same thing last year. The important thing is that Parkman and Hayes are killing the ball. Serrano, he's lying in the weeds. Vaughn, he's off to a slow start. But look out, they're going to erupt. They're going to bust loose. Right. Yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to bust loose.
They're a powder keg
Juggernaut.
I love the feeling of opening day. I play that clip because it's one of the best baseball movies of all time, Major League, but I also play it because it really represents the feeling around baseball and the conversation so well. There's all this optimism. You think the team had a bad spring, but you love their additions that they made over the winter. Everybody starts the season 0-0. Everybody's equal. Everybody's optimistic. And that's the sentiment that I hear all the way through spring training and all the preparation that I've done for the season. It's pretty much universal. Sure, there's teams like the now Sacramento Athletics or the Miami Marlins who don't have much of a chance to compete. Sure, but I hear win projections from anybody, from broadcasters to beat reporters, anybody. They're always optimistic. They're always towards the ceiling of a baseball team, and that's why I love opening day. That's why it's one of the best traditions in sports. The Phillies open up the season on Thursday down in D.C. Sure, you're going to see those cherry blossoms all over TV. Myself, I will not be in D.C. Do have an event on Friday night down at Citizens Bank Park. That's to unveil what's new. I went to it last year. It was just a bunch of foods and merchandise, but check out my social media accounts for videos, photos, whatever to get you excited for the home opener on Monday against the Colorado Rockies. Pay attention all season, too, as I ramp up coverage, getting some extended access. I have full season credentials down at Citizens Bank Park this year. We're also planning on doing a little more video content on social media platforms and on 97.5thefanatic.com. And one thing I'm going to pay close attention to this year, which I already started up with last year, Rob Thompson, a guy I respect a lot. I analyzed his role a lot last season, and I think he does a great job. But I'm paying close attention to change when the roster didn't change that much in the offseason. You're expecting internal improvement. I'm going to be paying close attention to that this year. I'm also going to be fixating on a lot of things that happen at 97.5 The Fanatic, which I've already been doing to an extent. You've heard some of the nuggets from Ricky Bowe on the show. I'm going to play some audio later of Jason Stark. He's doing weekly hits on The Fanatic, and they're getting a few broadcast games on Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN Radio, and a few other of the national broadcasts. A lot of them are with John Sciambi, Boog Sciambi, and Doug Glanville. That's pretty much their go-to team. But the Fanatic's going to be airing some games. IP is still going to have the regular team broadcasts, but hopefully the Fanatic ramps up the coverage with the national teams. So a lot of things I'm excited for this season, and I'm thinking in the mindset of Bob Uecker in Major League and those infamous fans that sit out in the outfield and criticize everything the team does. You can find those guys at Citizens Bank Park too. The last part of my season preview today is going to be the bullpen, and I am going to get to the bench guys. Going to run through them very quickly at the end, along with the Rob Thompson analysis. But if you want my breakdowns of the position players or the starting pitchers, head back into the podcast feed in the last couple of weeks. The lineup I felt very confident with, just breaking down each of the starting 9, including Kyle Schwarber in that, because the starting pitchers had already been done. Remember, I listed my most intriguing as Ranger Suarez. Well, we've already got bad news on him. He's not eligible to come off the IL with a back injury until April 8th. And from what Dave Dombrowski said, they don't expect it to be that soon. So you're starting out with Taijuan Walker and already resurfacing some of the questions I talked about with Ranger Suarez. But today we'll go to the bullpen. It was a strength of the team in 2024, a regular season strength, but not a playoff strength. The lineup really got the bulk of the criticism for the playoff loss against the Mets. However, the bullpen was probably worse. The reason that the lineup came into focus was because people saw it as more of an issue going in, and I think there's a lot more basis as a long-term flaw if you want to say that the lineup is too boom or bust, too free swinging. But I think the anomaly of the bullpen performance actually had a bigger role in that series than any struggles at the plate. The bullpen was absolutely terrible. Jeff Hoffman really didn't show up in the NLDS. Carlos Estevez gave up the big hit in Game 4, although I thought the series was basically over at that point. That's something that's haunted Dave Dombrowski for really decades now. It's something that killed him with the Detroit Tigers back in the 2010 to 2015 range. A few disappointing playoff losses. Remember, David Ortiz hit that grand slam at Fenway Park off Joaquin Benoit to knock the Tigers out. That was part of the thinking last year at the deadline when Dombrowski acquired Carlos Estevez. They paid probably more of a premium price than maybe they should have to get Estevez, but they reshaped the entire bullpen, gave up Sir Anthony Dominguez and Greg Soto, and that didn't work out. But they again tweak it in the offseason. They let Hoffman walk to Toronto, and they get Toronto's guy, Jordan Romano. Yes, I am going to say Romano, the Canadian pronunciation, because it's the correct way to say it. But I ordered each of the bullpen pitchers in my breakdown on 97.5thefanatic.com of the likeliest to close a playoff game. I thought that was a little bit different than you're going to see in most season previews. A lot of these are going to focus on how Rob Thompson will start the season in his basically trust tree, the hierarchy of the bullpen. Jordan Romano is probably the most likely to start the season in save opportunities, even if he's not the real closer. I know that's another topic people love to pound to death, is a designated closer. Romano's going to be the closest to it out of the gates. Jose Alvarado is probably going to get plenty of chances also, but I'm not going to go in that order because it's a free-flowing thing that changes throughout the season. Rob talked about that all the way through the regular season last year before he decided on his real preference headed into the postseason. So I tried to go outside the box a little bit with my pick for the guy who's going to be saving games once the Phillies get to the playoffs, and I do expect them to have their 4th straight red October. The breakout candidate for almost everybody in spring training, to the point where it seems unoriginal, is Christopher Sanchez. I'm going to go with Orion Kerkering, though. He turns 24 on April 4th, and he's already in a rhythm as a late inning bullpen guy, at least good enough to be. He pitched in 64 games last season and had a 2.29 ERA, and he also had very high strikeout rate, not giving up a lot of base runners. Plus, he's already got 11 postseason appearances in his career. Remember, he came up as a rookie very late in 2023, but they did use him out of the bullpen in high leverage situations. Kerkering really stepped it up last year with the sweeper, and that's kind of a new age thing. The name sweeper as a pitch really didn't even exist until a few years ago, but he threw that 55% of the time last season, and the sweeper being a new age thing probably has at least a little bit to do with the analytics that have evolved through the game and the pitching aspect of it. Dave Dombrowski's acknowledged certain things about Kerkering's delivery on the record, and I've linked it to some of the analytical processes that the Phillies go through. You can read about that a little bit in the print version of this content. Like I say a lot of times, I'm not going to dive too deep into those numbers because I translate them into print a little bit more. But it's part of what drives my overall confidence in Orion Kerkering. He went in a mid-season slump last year, kind of like the rest of the team, right after the All-Star break. I'd say about mid-July to mid-August, he wasn't pitching very well, but he is my breakout candidate for this season. And if you want to go with some kind of bold prediction, I think he is your high-leverage closer, most likely to save a playoff game. He missed last opening day with the flu. He's not going to start this opening day in that role. But you watch in Red October, I bet you're going to see Orion Kerkering on the mound in the 9th inning. He's a right-hander, so he might overtake Romano in that role, but flip that around, go to the hefty lefty. Jose Alvarado is my second most likely. He showed up to spring training in great shape by all accounts. He added some velocity, even hit 102 on the gun down in Clearwater. But he is coming off a relatively underwhelming season. I guess you can call it underwhelming because his second half really didn't match his first half. His velocity dipped. He struggled after the All-Star break. Again, you could probably say that about most of the team. But with Alvarado in particular, you could really tell when he was having a bad night as opposed to when he was on. When he's pitching at his best, he's really firing. But he is one of those guys who might be due for a pretty bad outing every now and then back there. He saved 13 games last year, but 12 of them were by June 11th. So by the time October came around, Rob actually had kind of limited trust. He only even made one appearance in the playoffs, and that was in a game that was already decided when the Mets were up. Remember, he took that leave of absence late in the season to go to Venezuela. They never gave a reason why, but that was in late August, and he had a strong September when he came back, but for a variety of reasons, again, could have just been situational. The NLDS was a 4-game series, so in a small sample size, it's possible that Rob Thompson would have gone to him if there was a more appropriate situation and you just didn't see it manifest itself. But Alvarado is one horse who got them to the World Series in 2022, so we know he can have postseason success. By the way, don't look at his numbers as the real indicator for that postseason. He was pitching really well to get the Phillies to a 2-1 lead. The bottom fell out in the World Series in games 4 and 6. He did have a scoreless outing in game 5, but he got smacked around in 2 instances. Everybody remembers that terrible home run to Yordan Alvarez in game 6. also had a bad night in Game 4, totally inflated his statistics. Something that I did come across, though, in breaking down Jose Alvarado, he leads the Phillies in saves since Rob Thompson took over as the manager in 2022. And the past 3 seasons, it's pretty easy to find the one number that indicates how well he's throwing. It's strikeouts per 9. He had 14.3 in 2022. When he was at his best, at least late in that season, he was probably at his career peak. 2023, he dropped a little bit, but it was still 13.9, which is absolutely outstanding. Last year, that dropped off pretty significantly, down to 9.2 strikeouts per 9, and that was partly linked to his little bit of dip in velocity. But with the power sinker especially, that'll tell you when Jose Alvarado is at his best. He's firing up by 100 or at least in the high 90s and really blowing that sinker by these hitters. Expect big things from the hefty lefty this year. Romano is my third guy, yes, but I'm not necessarily as high on him as a lot of other people seem to be. If you look at the numbers, he had the 3-year stretch, 21, 22, and 23, where he was one of the best closers in the game. He was 4th in saves, and look at the guys ahead of him, Emmanuel Clase, Josh Hader, and Kenley Jansen. Also 7th in ERA among qualified relievers over that span. So this guy was pitching at the top of the majors in terms of closers for 3 seasons. Last year, fell out of his rhythm, only pitched 15 games. The last one was in late May, and I'm sure in those 15 games, the elbow was a factor in the poor performance. It wasn't just when he went on the IL. But the thing that's got me considerably worried about this guy, he's 6'5", great velocity, gonna pitch with some power off the mound. He ranks in the top tier of the league in strikeout rate. You didn't get that with Estevez last year. But Jason Stark talked to Ricky Bowe on The Fanatic, and I got to play the audio. It applies to more than Romano, by the way. This is about the 3 biggest offseason additions for the Phillies. It's Jesus Luzardo, then Romano, and Max Kepler. But here's what Jason Stark had to say on The Fanatic.
Everybody knows I'm from Philadelphia, and they always want to talk to me, ask me stuff about the Phillies. I talked to an executive from one team one day about the Phillies. He loves their team. He thinks they're going to win the division. But he did raise questions about those 3 guys, and they're good ones. So let's go through them. Jesus Luzardo. He loves Jesus Luzardo, and I think that's pretty much unanimous. But here's the question he asks. Why did the Marlins trade him this year, this winter? He was coming off a tough year. He wasn't healthy much of the year. Why wouldn't they have waited, let him have a big first half, and then try to get much bigger value for him at the deadline? The only reason that makes sense, at least to hit this guy, the Marlins had to be worried about his health and whether he'd hold up. I know enough the thinking in the Marlins organization to think there's definite truth to that. All I can tell you is this guy's awfully dominant when he's healthy. So it'll be really interesting to watch this play out. Then Jordan Romano. First off, he's had a really good spring. Velocity is back. Slider has mostly been back to what it was. Command has been good. But the question this executive asked me was, why would Toronto non-tender a player like Jordan Romano? His thinking was, if they keep him, he probably only cost them something in the range of $7.5 million. He's a leader on their team. He's one of the most popular guys in their clubhouse. He's from Canada, Ricky. So then to replace him, they had to commit $33 million to Jeff Hoffman for 3 years, which is a lot more than they would have paid Jordan Romano. And it just makes you wonder what the Blue Jays knew. I would say if we asked the Blue Jays that, they would tell us it's more what they didn't know. He was coming off a rough year. They just weren't ready to commit to him so soon after the season ended. Wow, what a valid question. And then Max Kepler would be the third guy. This executive thinks Kepler's a really talented player, better player than people seem to think he is. He's had a hell of a spring. The question that he asked me was, think about it. Nobody knows him better than the Twins. It's not like they have superstars all over their outfield. He's a really good defender, good runner, has power. Why would the Twins not have even tried to keep him, right? And I think the answer is they were frustrated with how a succession of little health issues kept piling up and how often he was unavailable. But here's what I'm thinking. Doesn't that describe like half their team? All of these are kind of wait to see who's right. But aren't they interesting questions?
Keep your fingers crossed on Jordan Romano to have a healthy season and then flip it around again and go to the fourth guy, Matt Strahm. Now, he was excellent in 2024, better than really anybody could have expected. He had a 1.87 ERA, and obviously you're going to feel confident in a pitcher who was that good for a full season. Remember, he had a 21-game scoreless streak last year. He did have a weird spring with a minor injury, and then he had that weird cardboard box incident where he had to wrap his middle finger on his pitching hand. So that set him back in one of the shorter outings he was supposed to do. Very strange circumstances there. But the injuries down in Clearwater are not really what worries me. What I'm really thinking about, can Matt Strahm keep this up at age 33? Relievers are some of the most unpredictable players in professional sports. Strahm had never pitched as well during his major league career as he did last season, and to have a 1.87 ERA, that was ninth in the majors among relievers. Is he going to replicate that performance? It's pretty tough to do, and I don't have some reason to rip Matt Strahm and say to you on this show that he can't do that again, but you just have to look at the track record of major league relievers and how fluky these things can be before you really say that he's going to replicate his performance from last season. Still optimistic about this guy who strangely looks a lot like Nicolas Cage, but he's still the fourth most likely guy to close a playoff game. And he's the last of the high leverage relievers that I'm ranking here. Remember last season with Sir Anthony and Soto to start off at least? You thought a lot of these guys were in the mix as maybe a closer option. You had Alvarado, you had Hoffman, Soto and Dominguez, Strahm. These guys were all kind of power arms. This year you have four of them. Strahm and Alvarado from the left side, and then Romano and Kerkering from the right side. After you get out of that top group, though, I think your fifth guy is Tanner Banks. He came over at the trade deadline last year. He was supposed to be a left-handed specialist. Maybe he'll slide into that role a little bit better this season because his splits with the White Sox against lefties were pretty good. He might also be a fit for a little bit of a long man role. Right after they got him last year, two of his first three outings were 2 innings pitched. And then the final, I guess that's about 2 months of the season, he ended up pitching 22 games overall. But that final stretch, he didn't really fill that role of the long man. I know they had plans to stretch him out early in the season, and also possibly our next guy on the list, Jose Ruiz. But Tanner Banks is going to have to play out his role as the season progresses as much as anybody, because he's a big question mark. I thought it was a little bit weird after they got him last year. His usage was just a little bit flaky, but I think he's going to be in the mix right behind that top group as a middle relief guy, and in that same tier is Jose Ruiz. I have to admit, I really didn't think much of this guy when I first saw him last year, but he really turned some heads and crept into Rob's trust by the time the playoffs came along. His four-seamer is around 96, and he also has a power sinker that he throws around 95 too. You couldn't really realistically expect him to pass some of those big guns to save a playoff game last year. But Jose Ruiz will probably be in competition as the third right-handed guy behind Romano and Kerkering to start the season. He gained a lot of favor, and he deserves some credit. He's got his big league future on the line with somebody who doesn't have as much of a track record as my next guy. It's Joe Ross, and he's at an unusual career path, but more experience. They want him to be a swingman, kind of like they used Matt Strahm as a couple years ago, 2023, when Strahm first signed. Remember, they had him making starts at the beginning of the season. Joe Ross isn't as established as Strahm was at that point, didn't make as much money when they signed him in free agency, but he made some starts back towards the beginning of his career with the Washington Nationals, and then he ended up moving on to Milwaukee after a long-term injury where he had Tommy John surgery. He started the season with the Brewers last year in the rotation, ended up getting pushed out to the bullpen, but really found his role there, and he ended up in the trust tree for Milwaukee last season. So a good mark on him, a decent signing for the Phillies, a depth guy. And remember, that's something they sorely missed late last season when they had nobody who could slide into that fifth starter role. If you had a guy like Joe Ross at that point in September last year, I bet you they would have just gone with him as an opener or some kind of piggyback guy to where he's starting and throwing 3-4 innings before you bridge to another guy, maybe like Tanner Banks. So I like the signing. This guy's 6'4", throws a good slider, good sinker. Watch for Joe Ross as maybe more of a utility man, and we'll see what we get from Taijuan Walker replacing Ranger in the bullpen. When Ranger comes back, I guess they could push Walker out to a relief role, but I don't know how that's going to go. That's one of the worst sources for optimism that you can think of going into opening day. You just don't know what you're going to get from Taijuan Walker. A lot of people talked about him having a good spring, but I know his last two outings in spring weren't good, and he's really under pressure here. He's not going to get any benefit of the doubt from fans, but we'll see how it plays out. The Phillies want to go into the season with Taijuan Walker in the starting rotation, when I would probably pick Ross as that fifth guy. Like I just called him a swingman, I think he's a better option right away. They're going to go with Taijuan Walker. Before I move on to a little bit of a variable here, I want to just quickly address Carlos Hernandez. This is the guy they just got over the waiver wire. He's pitched 5 seasons since 2020. He's swung back and forth with the Kansas City Royals between the majors and AAA. And he has a 98-mile-per-hour fastball. That's why they got him. High velocity, big guy. Again, he falls in line with why they signed Romano. He had a decent ERA last season in 27 games, in the majors 27 games, but also pitched a good amount at AAA where he struggled. And he's somebody who has a very high walk rate over his career. So we'll see how that plays out. It tends to be one of the most critical points that Rob Thompson is ever comfortable giving to the media. When a reliever comes in and starts walking guys, he'll point it out in post-game press conferences where he's usually a lot more hesitant to criticize players on the record than that. And that's another thing Ricky Bo stresses. Former relief pitcher, the one thing that really gets him going is when a reliever comes in and walks guys. So that's something that Carlos Hernandez is going to have to fight. He's been sort of an unpredictable guy throughout his career, but they're kind of taking a flyer on him as the lowest leverage reliever, at least to start the season. And remember, an opening day roster does not really give you the best indicator of what's going to happen for the rest of the season. I don't think Hernandez is going to be on the roster this whole time. We'll see what happens with Ranger, but especially with what everybody's talking about, Andrew Painter coming to the rotation in the summer. That might force somebody like Ranger out to the bullpen. That might force the Phillies to use a 6-man rotation. There's a lot of things in play there. And what you see in March 27th, is going to dominate the conversation, sure, but it's part of the footballization of every sport where people think it's like making the roster out of training camp the final cut. It's a lot less significant in baseball, so that's why I'm not too worried about what happens with Carlos Hernandez in the immediate future, which is like the most appropriate link to what I'm going to talk about immediately after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. And when I said that relievers are fickle throughout a season and there will be rotating pieces in that bullpen in and out, well, that actually applies to the bench even more than it does the bullpen. And that's why there's not a separate article for the fourth group of this roster on 975thefanatic.com, the bench guys. You have Edmundo Sosa, Johan Rojas, Rafael Marchand, and Cody Clemens that are going to start the season on the bench. But Dave Dombrowski even came out and admitted that Cody Clemens, really the effectual 26th man on the roster right now, he's not really going to play that much of a role early in the season. That's why when they really didn't need a left-handed bat, they still elected for Cody Clemens over Buddy Kennedy, who was probably the last cut. They kept Clemens because he's a better overall player, not a better fit on the roster. He's not going to play that much anyway, unless there's an injury. I think the other guys are more significant to the overall outlook on the team this season. You saw Edmundo Sosa have one of his better seasons of his MLB career last year. He filled in a few times for guys on the IL. He even started a game in the playoffs when Alec Boehm got benched in Game 2. Remember, Rob Thompson said he wanted better energy in the lineup? Well, Edmundo Sosa brought that pretty consistently when he was called upon last year. He definitely improved his stock in the organization over 162. He even tried some outfield reps in spring training. We'll see how comfortable they are with using him in the outfield. I think it's going to be more of something where maybe they turn to him in a pinch in the late innings if there's some kind of switch. I don't think he's going to see that much time, especially because they're carrying Johan Rojas behind him. He's going to be the spot starter, defensive replacement out there, the preferred fielder, preferred guy you have in center with Brandon Marsh, Max Kepler, and Nick Castellanos as the starters. Rojas is a good guy to bring something behind them with an above-average glove, something he brings to the table. Also is a good base runner, maybe pinch runs. You see some of these guys in the majors. That's where Johan Rojas is going to carve out his role on this team. Rafael Marchand, I'm not going to go too much into depth with him because I talk so much about him with the overall catching situation in the organization. He replaces Garrett Stubbs. The thing I want to see from him is how he handles the pitching staff, because for how much I rip Stubbs, it does say something about how much chatter there was about the transition to a new backup catcher. We'll see what Marchand can do if he is on the Major League roster throughout the season. He's another guy, though, where health is the big question with him also. Who's keeping all these guys together? Rob Thompson, a baseball lifer who got his chance to manage at age 58. Remember, he was mulling retirement before Joe Girardi got fired, and the Phillies made the move to put him in the big spot. And I want to trace back to a conversation that I've already brought up on this show. It's from last October with Joe Maddon, former World Series manager. Remember with the Chicago Cubs back in 2016, also had a stint with the Angels with Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout. But Joe Maddon, one of the big topics that we discussed was the evolution of Major League managers over time, and I thought he had some great insight on it. So take a listen to what Joe Maddon said, then I'm going to play a second clip from Larry Bowa. How do you think the job of a manager has evolved, and what characteristics do you think make the best managers today?
Well, today's manager has to be very communicative. He's got to be collaborative in order to really work well with the front office and his team on the field and his coaching staff. That's the primary difference. I mean, I think there was a time the manager was autonomous. Right now, it's not nearly autonomous. It's more of an autonomous front office. And I think the manager's role has been kind of morphed into more of a middle manager's role. When I first came up, like a Gene Mock or Earl Weaver or whomever, all those dudes, Whitey Herzog, they pretty much ran the show. They were the scouting staff, the analytical staff. They set up cutoffs and relays, et cetera, et cetera. They said who was going to stay and leave. And I'm not saying I agree with that completely. I do not. But that's the difference. The autonomous manager is now more a linchpin between the field and the front office.
And Joe Maddon has a reputation as a great analytics guy. So when he touched on that a little bit, that speaks some volumes to me, because he knows probably as well as anybody what kind of dynamic exists between a front office who's looking at all of these analytics and what he mentioned about how managers get this information and how they decide how they have to communicate it to the players. I want to go for a little bit of a different dynamic with Larry Bowa, because I think his experience, especially with this particular organization, is very important insight into how they're going to judge Rob Thompson. Larry, what do you think the best characteristics are of a Major League manager, and how do you think that's evolved over time?
I think right now it's very difficult to be a Major League manager. I really do, because there's so much involved. There's analytics involved. The social media is involved now. It's hard to get your point across if you want to do it in the dugout. Everything's got to be behind closed doors. I'm not saying players are sensitive, but it's a different generation now.
Definitely.
There's some great athletes out there. I think Rob Thompson does a great job. When you have a bunch of guys that are established players and you have to make sure everybody in the clubhouse is on the same page, I think that's very difficult. But it's completely different than when I manage and now like when I'm watching baseball now. It's a different game because the analytic people are involved, and I'm not saying they make out lines, but they give the manager all this information. He sorts it out and goes whatever direction he wants to go in.
Larry Bowa took some criticism for his stint as manager of the Phillies. Remember, when they made the change to Charlie Manuel, it was the flip side of Bowa. And what Manuel came in and did, he was the players manager, kind of like Rob Thompson. So Larry Bowa, in hindsight, he has taken some heat, but I can tell you that this guy has maybe as much perspective as anybody as a Phillies lifer. He won the World Series back in 80 as a player. He was traded in the 80s after all that went down and wasn't very happy about it. but made up with the organization, had that stint as manager, and he's come back now in this senior role. I saw him out at batting practice a lot last year, working with some of these guys. They all say that he's great tactically. So for Larry to talk so highly about Rob Thompson and the job he does managing personalities especially stood out to me. Remember, this Phillies roster has so many established major leaguers, and a lot of them have had at least the origins of their success on other major league teams. Think about Harper, Schwarber, Castellanos, Trey Turner. All of these guys came to Philadelphia with track records already. Throw JT Realmuto into that group also. To manage these personalities, manage the egos, it's not easy. So when Rob takes on criticism from a lot of the fan base, I think you have to also consider that the dynamic of a clubhouse, what Rob Thompson has to manage, is a lot different than people realize. And what Larry Bowa said about addressing things behind closed doors, that's not something everybody is ever even aware of. Even people who have certain access to that clubhouse, like Larry Bowa, he's probably not aware of everything that goes on behind closed doors between Rob Thompson and the players. So that's one of my big focuses of the season, the theme of what I'm going to concentrate on in my evaluation of the team. Rob Thompson, what's his role? What kind of edge does he give this team? What are his shortcomings also? It's going to be a lot different than the things I talk about with John Tortorella. Rob is more of a laid-back guy, lot calmer demeanor, and that's probably the easiest contrast you're ever going to make to John Tortorella, who's one of the fiery coaches of the NHL, probably one of the most fiery coaches I've ever seen in professional sports. Opening day on Thursday, the Phillies come in with high hopes, another season with World Series expectations. You haven't gotten that World Series parade down Broad Street just yet, but this Phillies group is coming back hungry to get you that ring. I'll be talking to you a lot, Philadelphia, throughout this season about the Fightin' Phils.